"Pack your things," said the sheriff after her husband's family stripped her at dawn. The Pharaoh deed was in the tin box. I knew it before I walked up the porch steps because Clement Pharaoh was standing in the yard with his thumbs in his belt loops, and that particular look on his face. The one that said he'd already decided how a thing was going to go. It was early. The sun had barely cleared the ridgeline east of town and the frost was still on the grass. I'd ridden out from Carver Creek the moment Dilly Oaks came to the jailhouse and told me what she'd seen through the widow Pharaoh's kitchen window. Dilly was not a woman who alarmed easily. She'd raised 6 boys and buried 2. When she came to me with her bonnet still unpinned and her hands shaking, I didn't ask twice. I was 53 years old that morning. I'd been sheriff of this county for 19 years, and before that I'd done things I don't talk about, for men who no longer ran anything. My knees were starting to give me trouble in the cold, and my right eye had gone bad the winter before, and I had a habit of carrying a plug of tobacco I never quite got around to chewing. Just held it. Something to do with my hand. The Pharaoh Ranch was 4 miles outside of town on the South Road. Thomas Pharaoh had died 2 nights previous. A ruptured something inside him, the doctor said. One of those things that happens to a man with no warning and no particular cause, 41 years old and otherwise sound. I'd known Thomas to nod to. A quiet man, worked his land, stayed out of the kind of trouble I had to concern myself with. His wife, Clara, I knew better. She'd been Clara Marsh before the marriage, and her father had sold me a roan horse in 1871 that was the best animal I ever owned. Thomas's brothers were Clement and Dix. I want you to understand what I mean when I say the Pharaoh family was old county money gone bad in the way that old money sometimes goes, like a piece of fruit that's been kept past its season and looks fine from a distance until you're close enough to smell it. Their father, Hector Pharaoh, had built this county up in the years after the war when nobody else had the stomach for it. He died 8 years back and left the main house and the operation to his sons, and in 8 years Clement and Dix had managed to run through most of what Hector had spent 30 years building. They still had the land. They still had the name. What they didn't have was the patience or the character their father had possessed, and they knew it, and that knowledge made them mean in the particular way that men are mean when they've wasted something they know they should have kept. Thomas had been the youngest. He'd had his share of the Pharaoh land parceled out to him on his marriage and had worked it separately, quietly, without his brothers. Clara had told me once, when I ran into her at the general store, that Thomas didn't much like going to the main house. She'd said it matter of fact, the way you say something that's just true and doesn't need explaining. Now Thomas was dead, and I was walking up the porch steps toward Clement Pharaoh at 6:30 in the morning, and the tin box with the deed was under his arm. "Sheriff," he said. "Clement," I stopped at the bottom step. "Where's Mrs. Pharaoh?" He tipped his head toward the house. "Inside." "What are you doing on her porch at this hour?" He had that smile. Clement always had the smile ready like a card he'd already palmed. Family business. Thomas's estate reverts to the Pharaoh family. That's the arrangement, always has been. He patted the tin box. "It's in the deed." "I'd like to see the deed." "You're welcome to." When the lawyers looked at it. "I'd like to see it now." The smile stayed, but something behind his eyes went flat. "I don't think that's how it works, Sheriff." "Clement," I put my foot on the first step. "I'm going to go inside and speak with Mrs. Pharaoh. You're going to stay on this porch." He didn't move immediately. That was always the thing with Clement. He needed a moment to calculate whether the other man was serious, because most men in his experience turned out not to be. He looked at me. I looked at him. I had been in this county 19 years, and I had stood in front of harder men than Clement Pharaoh, and the calculation had always ended the same way. He stepped aside. I found Clara in the kitchen. She was at the table. She still had on the black dress from the night before. She'd been receiving visitors yesterday, the neighbors and the church women who come when a man dies, and her hair was down because someone had taken the pins. I noticed that right off. A woman's hair loose at 6 in the morning in her own kitchen, and her sitting straight in the chair with her hands flat on the table, and the look on her face that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but something that had compressed those two things together into something harder than either. Dick's Pharaoh was standing at the kitchen counter. He was the elder of the two and the worse of the two, which was a distinction you had to think about to appreciate. He was holding a cup of coffee that was not his cup and not his coffee, and he didn't look embarrassed about it. On the table in front of Clara there was a small pile of things: a ring, a brooch, a folded piece of paper that I recognized as a promissory note because I'd seen enough of them in my years, a photograph in a tin-framed Thomas from the look of it. I looked at the pile and I looked at Clara and I said to Dix, "Get out of this kitchen." Dick said, "Now, Sheriff." I didn't say get out of the house. I said get out of this kitchen. Go stand with your brother. Dix put the cup down on the counter, didn't put it in the dry rack, just set it down on the counter like he might want it again, and he walked out. I pulled out a chair across from Clara and sat down. She was 28. I want to be precise about that because it matters. 28 years old and widowed 2 nights ago, and sitting in her own kitchen at dawn with her hair down and her jewelry in a pile in front of her where someone had put it to make a point. There was a bruise on her left wrist, fresh, the purple-yellow kind that comes from a grip. I didn't say anything about the bruise right then. "Did you sleep?" I said. She looked at me. It was a strange question to ask. "No," she said. "Have you eaten?" "No." I got up and went to her stove. There was a pot sitting cold on the back burner, some kind of soup from yesterday. The neighbor women always bring soup, and I got the fire going under it. I found a bowl, found a spoon. I did it quietly, the way you do when the noise in a room is already too loud even though nobody's speaking. "Dilly Oaks came to me this morning," I said, my back to her, "told me what she saw." Clara said nothing. "Clement says the deed reverts, that Thomas's parcel comes back to the main Pharaoh operation upon his death. That's what he says." Was that Thomas's understanding? I heard her take a breath. Thomas believed his father's will was the binding document. His father left him this land outright as a wedding gift. Thomas believed it was his to leave to me. She stopped. "I don't know what's in that deed Clement has. Thomas handled the papers. I never had reason to look at them." I carried the bowl to the table and set it down in front of her. She looked at it like she'd forgotten what a bowl was, and then she picked up the spoon. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened this morning," I said, "from when they arrived." She told me. They'd come at 4 in the morning. Both of them, Clement and Dix had 2 of his ranch hands with him. She'd been asleep, the first sleep she'd managed since Thomas died, and they'd knocked on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. When she answered, Clement had pushed past her into the house. He said he'd come to do an inventory of Thomas's estate, which was now Pharaoh family property. Dix had gone straight to the bedroom. The ranch hands stood in the entry and didn't move. She told them to get out. Clement had smiled and kept walking. He went to the desk in the front room where Thomas kept his papers and his lockbox. He found the tin box. He had a key. She didn't know when Thomas had given him a key, or if Thomas had. The key might not have been Thomas's to give. Dix had come back from the bedroom with a leather satchel. Inside it were the things now on the table in front of her. He'd gone into her own bedroom, into her jewelry box, into the drawer of her bedside table, into the wardrobe. He'd taken the ring off her finger. I let that sit in the air for a moment. She said it quietly, no particular inflection, just a woman stating a fact because the fact was what it was. She held up her left hand briefly, the way you show someone a wound not for sympathy but just so they can see. The ring had been her mother's. Thomas had given it to her on the day they were married because he knew what it meant to her. Dix had looked at it on her hand and said it was now Pharaoh property, and held out his own hand and waited until she gave it to him. I looked at the bruise on her wrist. He held your wrist, I said. He held my wrist, she said. I stood up from the table. I took my hat off and set it on the counter. This was something I did sometimes when I was settling something in myself, because I didn't like to do anything with my hat in my hand. It seemed uncertain, unsettled, and I needed both hands free even if I wasn't going to use them. I'm going to go speak with Clement and Dix, I said. And then what? She said, not hostile, just asking. She'd been asking that question all morning, was my guess, and nobody had given her an answer yet. And then I'm going to come back in here, I said, and I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. What happened was this. I went out to the porch, and I told Clement that the deed was now in dispute, and that he was not to remove any further property from this house or this land until the matter had been settled by a judge in the county seat. I told Dix that the items on the kitchen table needed to be left where they were, including the ring. Dix looked at his brother and Clement looked at me and did the calculation again. I said, Dix, the ring. He took it out of his vest pocket and set it on the porch railing. I picked it up and held it in my palm, and I said to Clement, you and your brother are going to leave this property now. Your ranch hands are going to leave with you. If I come back here and find you've returned before the matter is settled in court, I'm going to arrest you for trespass and harassment of a widow, and I'm going to make sure the judge in the county seat knows exactly how the two of you conducted yourselves on the night after your brother's burial. Clement said, Thomas was buried yesterday afternoon. I know when Thomas was buried, I said. I was there. They left. I watched them go, Clement and Dix on horseback, the two ranch hands behind them, until I couldn't see the dust anymore. Then I went back inside. Clara had eaten about half the soup. She was holding the bowl in both hands like it was keeping her warm. I came back to the table and sat down and put the ring in the middle of the table between us. She looked at it. She picked it up and put it on her finger, and she wrapped her right hand around her left and held it there. What's going to happen? She said. I don't know yet for certain, I said. The deed might say what Clement says it says. Thomas might have signed something he didn't fully understand or that he thought superseded his father's will, or Clement might be lying, which is also possible. A judge will have to look at it. I paused. But that takes time, weeks possibly, and in the meantime, I'm alone on this property and Clement Farrow has a key to my lockbox, she said. Yes. She set the bowl down. She looked out the kitchen window at the yard, at the frost still on the ground, at the place where Clement had been standing with his thumbs in his belt loops. I don't have family in this county, she said. My father died in '74. My mother's in Kansas with my sister. I know, I said. I don't have money of my own. Whatever Thomas had is in dispute now. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, so what do I do? I've been thinking about this since I left Dilly Oaks and got on my horse. I'm not a man who decides things in the moment, never have been. I like to have already decided before the moment arrives, so that when it comes I'm not deciding, I'm executing. I'd had 4 miles on horseback to work this out, and I'd worked it out. Pack your things, I said. She looked at me. I have a room at the back of the jailhouse, I said. I've had deputies stay there. It's clean. It locks from the inside. It's not much, but it's not here, and nobody is going to come to the sheriff's jailhouse and let themselves in at 4 in the morning to take anything. Sheriff, you'll be safe there while the matter works through the court, I said. The food is whatever I'm cooking, which is not much, but it's regular. You're free to come and go. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your days. I stopped. I'm not asking you anything, Mrs. Farrow. I'm telling you what I can offer. You can say no. She looked at me for a long time. She was reading me, the way a smart woman reads a man she doesn't entirely know, looking for what's underneath the offer. I let her look. I had nothing underneath it that I wasn't willing for her to see. Why, she said. I thought about that. Because Dix Farrow put his hand on your wrist in your own kitchen, I said, And the answer to that is that you shouldn't be in that kitchen anymore. She packed 2 bags. She was methodical about it, not fast, not panicked, but deliberate, the way a woman packs when she's not sure how long she's going to be gone and is trying not to think too hard about that. I waited in the kitchen. I could hear her moving around in the bedroom, the sound of the wardrobe door, the particular silence of someone deciding what to leave behind. She came out with 2 canvas bags and a hat box. "The chickens," she said. "I'll have somebody out to tend them," I said. "Joe Alderman's boy, probably. He's reliable." She nodded. She looked around the kitchen once, the way you look at a room you're not sure you're coming back to. Then she picked up her bags and I carried the hat box and we went out to where my horse was tied. The ride into Carver Creek was quiet. She sat behind me on the roan. I still had a roan, different horse, same color. And she held on with one hand on my coat and the other keeping her hat from blowing. I didn't talk and she didn't talk. The sun was fully up now and the frost was coming off the grass, and it smelled like the particular thing the earth smells like in early morning in October, cold and green and clean. And I remember thinking that it was a strange morning to be noticing the smell of the air. The room at the back of the jailhouse was what I'd said, it was clean and not much else. Iron bed, wool blankets, a washstand, a window that looked out at the alley. I'd had the last deputy leave in June and I hadn't used the room since. It smelled a little closed in. I opened the window. Clara put her bags down on the floor and looked around the room. "I can hang a curtain on that window," I said. "It's fine," she said. "The stove in the main office keeps this room warm enough. If it doesn't, there's another blanket in the..." "Sheriff," she said. I stopped. "Thank you," she said. "This is fine." I nodded. I set the hat box down on the bed. "I'll be in the front office if you need anything. There's no prisoner right now, so it'll be quiet." I started toward the door and then I stopped. "I'm going to ride out to the county seat this afternoon to speak with a lawyer I know there about the deed and what Clement can and can't do while the matter's in dispute. Is there anything you want me to ask him?" She was quiet for a moment. "Ask him about the promissory note," she said. "The one on the table. Thomas signed it 3 years ago. I don't know what's on it. I never knew about it until this morning." I made a note of that. "All right," I said, and I left her to it. The county seat was Millard, 20 miles east. I took the afternoon ride and I was back before dark, and what the lawyer told me was complicated and also, in the end, not complicated at all. The deed was real. Clement wasn't lying about that. There was language in it, language that the lawyer said was unusual, possibly improper, certainly the kind of thing that a man signs without understanding, that returned the parcel to the Farrow family estate upon Thomas's death without male heirs. Thomas and Clara had no children. The language was airtight, the lawyer said, which meant that Clement's claim on the land was probably going to hold. The promissory note was a different matter. It was a loan from 3 years ago. Thomas had borrowed money from Clement when a bad season left him short, and the note had a clause in it that the lawyer read twice and then looked at me over his spectacles. The clause said that in the event of default, which had not occurred, Clement could claim certain personal property. It did not specify what personal property. The lawyer said the clause was vague enough to be challenged, and that coming into a widow's house before dawn to take her jewelry was not a legal enforcement of any debt instrument he'd ever seen. "Can I use that?" I said. "You can use it," he said. "Whether it holds is another question, but it gives you something to stand on." I rode back in the dark, which I don't mind. I know the road. Clara was in the front office when I came in. She'd found the coffee pot and made coffee, good coffee, better than I made, and she had a candle going on the desk. She was sitting in the chair I usually sat in. She stood up when I came in. "Sit down," I said. "It's fine." I told her what the lawyer had said. I told her all of it, including the part about the land, which was the part I didn't want to tell her. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she sat with it for a moment. "The land," she said. "I'm sorry," I said. "Is there any way to fight it?" The lawyer thinks probably not. The language is unusual, but it's not illegal. It might take years to untangle, and it would cost more than the land is worth. She nodded. She looked at the candle. "Thomas didn't know," she said. "He wouldn't have. He trusted his brother." "I think that's right." "He trusted Clement," she said again, and there was something in it that wasn't anger, wasn't grief, but was the specific pain of understanding that the person you loved had been maneuvered by someone he loved and never knew it. I poured myself a cup of her coffee and I sat down across from her and I said, "The note is different. What Dix did this morning, taking those things, I think I can make that stick. It might not get you the land, but it's something." "What does make it stick mean?" "It means I go to the judge in Millard with what the lawyer told me, and I make the case that Clement and Dix trespassed and took property under a fraudulent interpretation of a debt instrument, which is a serious matter in this state. It means the ring and the brooch and everything else on that table this morning stays yours, legally, with a judge's order saying so. And Clement and Dix pay a fine at minimum, possibly worse, depending on how the judge feels about men who go into a widow's house before sunrise and put their hands on her." She was quiet for a moment. "Do it," she said. I went to Millard 3 more times over the next 5 weeks. The first 2 times I went alone. The third time the lawyer needed Clara's testimony, and she came with me, which meant another roan ride on the same cold road, except this time she knew where we were going and why. I want to tell you about those 5 weeks because they matter, and because they were ordinary in the way that the important parts of a life are usually ordinary. She cooked. That was the first thing. She found the state of my kitchen: a hot plate, a skillet, a pot, a shelf with flour and salt and not much else, deeply inadequate, and she set about fixing it. She asked me once politely if she could make some additions, and I said yes, and then she made additions and the food got better, which was a change I noticed. She was not in the jailhouse all day. She went out. She helped Mabel Oakes at the dry goods store 3 mornings a week, which was Dilly's sister-in-law, and she helped the school teacher, a young man named Garrett, with the younger children on Thursday afternoons because she'd had some schooling, and Garrett was overwhelmed. She came back in the evenings and we sat at the desk sometimes, and she read and I did paperwork, and it was quiet. She asked me questions. This surprised me at first. I'm not a man people ask questions of. I'm the man people ask questions to about problems they have, which is different. She asked about the county. She asked about cases I'd handled. She asked about things she'd noticed: a family that seemed to be struggling, a man she'd seen drinking in the street at noon. She was trying to understand the place she was in, and she was asking me because I knew it. I answered. It became a habit. I should say here that I was not a man who'd had a woman in his life for some years. My wife had died in '71, 12 years before. We'd had no children. I had learned slowly to be alone in a way that didn't bother me, or that bothered me only in the particular hours between midnight and about 3 in the morning, which I handled by getting up and making coffee and sitting with it. Clara didn't change that situation. She wasn't there in the middle of the night. She was asleep in the back room, behind a locked door, as was right and proper. But she changed the hours around it. She changed the morning, which had been quiet in a hollow way, and the evening, which had been quiet in an empty way. It was still quiet. It was a different kind of quiet. I'm not telling you I fell in love with her in those 5 weeks. I'm telling you I noticed things. The way she set a coffee cup down, not delicately but with precision, exactly in the spot she decided on without looking. The way she read, with one finger tracing the line she was on, like she was afraid of losing her place. The way she laughed, which didn't happen often, but when it did was sudden and a little surprised, like she hadn't expected to laugh. I didn't say anything about any of it. I was a 53-year-old man with bad knees and a bad eye, and I was the man who'd taken her in because, Dick's Pharaoh had put a bruise on her wrist. I kept those distinctions clear. The third trip to Millard was in late November, on a day that started cold and got colder. We rode out early and I could see her breath in the air in front of her, and I gave her my heavier coat over her own coat, which she protested, and I said the cold didn't bother me, which was partially true. The testimony was in the judge's chambers, not a full courtroom. Judge Harlan was a man I'd dealt with before, fair, thorough, not in the habit of wasting time or tolerating men who wasted his. Clement and Dix were there with a lawyer from the city, a man in a good coat who talked fast. Clara sat across from him and told what had happened on the morning after Thomas's funeral in a voice that was steady and precise and did not waver. And when the lawyer in the good coat tried to suggest that she might be misremembering the hour or the nature of the exchange, she looked at him with the particular look of a woman who has been managing harder men than him for longer than he knows and said, "No, I'm not." Judge Harlan asked her about the bruise. She showed him her wrist. The bruise was faded by then but still visible if you knew where to look, and Judge Harlan knew where to look. The lawyer in the good coat said something about grief and confusion and misunderstanding. The judge looked at him over his own spectacles, which were different from the lawyer's spectacles but had the same effect, and said, "Counsel, I'm going to need you to stop talking for a moment." He turned to Clement and Dix, who were sitting to one side, and he said, "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want a direct answer. Did you or your associate enter Mrs. Pharaoh's home before 6 in the morning on the day in question?" Clement looked at his lawyer. "Directly," the judge said. Clement said, "Yes." "Did you remove personal property from the premises?" Clement said, "We were enforcing a financial instrument." "Did you remove personal property from the premises?" "Yes." The judge wrote something down. He wrote for longer than you'd expect. Then he said, "I'm going to take the matter under advisement. You'll have my ruling within a week." He looked at Clara. "Mrs. Pharaoh, the items in dispute are to remain in your possession pending my ruling. Is that understood by all parties?" The lawyer in the good coat said something. The judge said, "I'll take that as a yes." We rode back in the late afternoon. The cold had held all day, and now the sky was the particular color it gets before snow, not gray but a kind of pale silver that flattens everything out and makes distances hard to judge. Clara rode behind me and I could feel her hands on my coat, the same grip as the first ride, one hand steady and one hand holding her hat. About halfway back, with the snow starting, she said, "He didn't like us much." The lawyer. "Clement," she said, the look on his face when the judge said to leave the items with me, "He didn't like us at all." "No," I said. "Are you worried about that?" I thought about it. "No," I said again. "Clement's going to lose this. A man who's losing tends to look like a man who doesn't like you." She was quiet for a bit, riding with the snow coming down light around us. Then she said, "What do you think he'll do?" "Make noise," I said. "Talk in town. Try to make you out to be something you're not. He might try to come to the jailhouse." "And if he does?" "Then he comes to the jailhouse," I said, "and I'm the one he talks to." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "You've done this before." "Done what?" "Stood between someone and the people trying to take from them." "It's the job," I said. "I know it's the job," she said. "That's not what I mean." I didn't answer that right away, because I was thinking about what she meant. The snow was coming heavier now and I was watching the road. "I suppose I have," I said. "Does it get easier?" "Standing between?" "Yes." "No," I said, "but it gets more certain. You stop wondering if you're going to do it and start just doing it. The wondering was always the hard part." She thought about that. I could feel her thinking about it, the particular stillness of a person turning something over. Then she said, "That's not a small thing." "No," I said. And we rode the rest of the way in the snow. The judge's ruling came 8 days later by post. I read it at the desk, and then I brought it to Clara where she was in the back sorting through something. I don't remember what. She read it. Her lips moved slightly when she read, which I'd noticed before. The ruling said the Farrow brothers' enforcement of the debt instrument had exceeded its scope and constituted unlawful seizure of personal property. It named the ring, the brooch, the photograph, and the promissory note itself, which was now rendered void by the judge's finding that the enforcement action violated the terms of the instrument. It levied a fine on Clement and Dix of $40 each, and ordered them to have no contact with Mrs. Farrow, her person, or her remaining personal property. The land was not in the ruling. We hadn't asked for it. Clara folded the paper carefully and set it on the bed. "That's it," she said. "That's it," I said. "The land is still theirs. The land is still theirs." She sat down on the edge of the bed. She was quiet. I was in the doorway. "I can't go back," she said. "No," I said. "I don't have anywhere to go." "Your mother's in Kansas," I said. "I know she is," she said. "She's in Kansas." She said it like a fact about the weather, accurate and unhelpful. I stood in the doorway. I had been thinking about this for the same reason I've been thinking about it since October, because I like to have decided before the moment arrives. I had decided, and I had decided not to say it because it wasn't a thing you say to a woman who's under your protection and doesn't have anywhere else to go. You don't say it because the power in that situation runs in one direction, and you're supposed to know which direction it runs. But I also knew that she was a woman who'd come into a room without knowing what was in it, and she'd sat straight in that chair with her hands flat on the table, and she'd ridden to Millard in the cold and told her story in a steady voice, and held her own against a lawyer who cost more per hour than I made in a day. And she'd asked me real questions and given me real answers, and cooked real food and laughed when something struck her funny, and I had noticed all of it, and kept my mouth shut for 5 weeks. I said, "I have a thought about that." She looked at me. "It's a strange thought," I said, "and I'm going to say it badly, and you're welcome to tell me it's out of the question." She looked at me and waited. "You could stay," I said. "Not in the back room, not like this." I stopped. I started over. "This isn't the life I imagined offering anybody. It's a jailhouse in a small county, and I'm 53 years old and my knees don't work right. But it's solid and it's paid for and it's mine, and I don't have any brothers with a key to my lockbox." I stopped again. I said, "You're a better person than I deserve to have around, which I'm aware of. If you want to go to Kansas, I'll give you what I can toward the fare. But if you wanted to stay—" I let the sentence end where it was because I didn't know how to finish it in a way that didn't sound like more than I meant or less than I meant, and I'd already said it badly twice. She looked at me for a long time. "You've been waiting to say that," she said. "A few weeks," I said. "Why didn't you?" "Because you just lost your husband and your home, and a man who takes advantage of that situation is not a man I want to be." She was quiet. She looked at the folded paper on the bed. She looked at the window and the alley beyond it, and then she looked back at me. "What would it look like," she said, "if I stayed?" "I don't know exactly," I said. "I know what it would look like from the outside, which is something we'd have to settle properly in front of a preacher if you were willing. And I know what I'd intend it to look like from the inside, which is," I thought about it, "a man and a woman making something together, taking turns being the hard one, cooking good food." I paused. "Making the county seat trips more bearable." She laughed. It was the surprised kind, the kind I'd noticed. She put her hand over her mouth and looked at the ceiling for a second, and then she looked back at me. "That was not said badly," she said. The first part was fine," she said. "I've heard worse proposals." Was that a yes? She looked at me, that long, reading look, the one she'd given me in October when I'd made the first offer, looking for what was underneath. I let her look. It's a yes, she said. We were married in December. Preacher Watts did it, in the church on the main road, on a Saturday morning with snow on the ground, and 3 inches more coming. The witnesses were Dilly Oakes and her husband Frank and the lawyer Garrett from the schoolhouse and old Joe Alderman, who'd been tending Clara's chickens and had taken the job seriously. Clement and Dix Farrow sent a letter, which I did not read to Clara and which I burned. I'm going to tell you about one morning in January, about 6 weeks after we were married. I had a matter out on the North Range, a dispute about a cattle line which is not interesting, and I'd ridden out early before first light, and I was back by mid-morning with cold in my bones that didn't want to come out. I came in the back door of the jailhouse, the one that went past the room that was now just a storage room, and into the main office. Clara was at the desk. She had the county records I'd been meaning to sort for 2 years spread out in front of her, and she was going through them with the finger-tracing reading she did, and she had a cup of coffee at her elbow. She looked up when I came in. She said, "You're cold." "I'm cold," I said. She got up from the desk and went to the stove and poured a cup without being asked, which she didn't need to be because she'd been watching what I did when I came in from a cold ride for 6 weeks and she knew. She handed me the cup and looked at my face, and then she put her hand on my jaw, the way you check if something's warm enough, or cold enough, or just to know what it is. Her hand was warm. She said, "Sit down, I'll make something." I sat down at the desk, in the chair that was hers now in the morning, and I looked at the county records she'd been sorting, which were beginning to make sense on the page in a way they hadn't before, because she'd been putting them in order. Outside the window the snow was coming down again, the same pale silver sky, the same flat distances. The stove ticked. The smell of whatever she was making started to fill up the room. I thought about the morning in October, the frost on the ground, Clement Farrow in the yard with his thumbs in his belt loops, and the tin box under his arm. I thought about Clara at that kitchen table with her hands flat and her hair down, and the pile of things that were hers in front of her. I thought, a man does what he can with what's in front of him, and most of it doesn't amount to much, and then sometimes it does. That was all, no bow on it, just that. The snow kept coming, and she kept cooking, and I drank my coffee and let the cold come out of my bones, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the best morning I can remember.